Dear esteemed conference participants, on behalf of the organizing committee, it is with great pleasure that I extend a warm welcome to each and every one of you to the National Interdisciplinary Online Students Conference organized by the Raleigh Literary Society, AMU. I'm Ufuk Khaya, a postgraduate student at Aligarh Muslim University and peer member of the Raleigh Literary Society. One of the oldest literary groups in India, the Raleigh Literary Society of Aligarh Muslim University, which was founded in honor of famed English critic Sir Walter Raleigh, who oversaw AMU's Department of English from 1885 to 1887, often hosts discussions, essay, contests, plays, and performances. We are delighted to have you join us for its very first literary fest and hope you enjoy this remarkable gathering of enthusiasts from around the country. This conference serves as a platform for the exchange of cutting-edge ideas, insights, and research findings on the theme, trauma, memory, and post-memory. As we gather here, we bring together a diverse community of undergraduate and postgraduate students and innovators from different universities, all driven by a common passion for advancing knowledge and pushing the boundaries of their respective fields. Over the course of the next few days, we have curated a rich and engaging program that includes keynote speeches, panel discussion, papers, and other interactive workshops. So, moving on, we have received an overwhelming response from students around the country. And we are proud to present a diverse selection of high-quality papers that showcase the latest achievements in these areas. Now, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce the chair of the session, Dr. Munir Aram Khuria. Dr. Munir is an assistant professor at the Department of English, Aligarh Muslim University. He is a brilliant scholar and educator at the forefront of interdisciplinary research with primary teaching and research interests lying at the intersection of comparative literature and cultural studies. Throughout his academic journey, he has nurtured an enduring curiosity about the intricate relationships between religion and literature. Dr. Munir's enthusiasm extends to embracing projects in comparative literary and cultural studies, focusing on languages like English, Arabic, Hindi, Malayalam, and Urdu. His intellectual pursuits also encompasses contemporary critical theory, minority studies, debate surrounding traditional and modernity, as well as the interplay between religion and secular. In addition to his academic accomplishments, Dr. Munir has been recognized for his scholarly achievements. He was awarded the prestigious University Grants Commission Junior Research Fellowship in 2012, followed by the Fulbright Nehru Doctoral and Professional Research Fellowship at the esteemed Department of Anthropology in the University of California at Berkeley, where he further honed his expertise. We welcome you, sir, and believe that your vast knowledge and unique perspective are sure to enlighten us all. Now, let me brief you all with the rules of the presentation. Each presenter would be given 10 plus 2 minutes to speak, and a gentle reminder would be given at the completion of 10 minutes. The presentation will be followed by the chair's comments, and finally, questions would be taken regarding the paper. Once again, I extend a warm welcome to all the participants, and I hope that your expertise will be enriching, enlightening, and truly memorable. Sir, would you like to share something before we start with the presentations?
Thank you, Ufuk, for your. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Can you hear? Yeah. So thank you, Ufuk, for your very generous introduction. I think without further ado, we can get started with these presentations. Is that fine?
Yes, sir. Okay. So once again, I extend a warm welcome to all participants, and I hope that sir's expertise will be enriching. With this, I would like to call the very first participant of the session, Mr. Afan Shiko from Aligarh Muslim University, to present his paper on the title, Catch-22 and the Genre of Black Comedy as Arising from Traumatic Experience. Afan, you can start from here.
Hello, I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you're audible, Afan.
And is my screen visible to everyone?
Yes, your screen is visible. Please continue.
Okay. So I hope that it's not a problem if I am not able to open my camera, because both the things. Can I open my camera with this?
You can turn your camera on and simultaneously you can present your presentation, if that's okay.
Okay, good. Okay, fine. Thank you. Okay, so good afternoon and heartiest greetings to all present here. The paper I'm presenting today is titled Catch 22 and the Genre of Black Comedy as Arising from Traumatic Experience. As you can read it on the slide, it's there. I'm just going to convert to slideshow. Okay. The paper I'm presenting today, I've already said this. Comedy is a term that has been widely understood to mean different things. For many critics, it is one of the 7 major plot types, one in which there is a happy ending. In this sense, comedy arising from a bleak, traumatic experience can be seen as somewhat oxymoronic. This is where black comedy, the antagonist to comedy itself, comes in. Joseph Hiller's Catch 22 is an example of this genre taken to its peak. For the purposes of this paper, I have subjected certain chapters of the novel by Joseph Heller to a close reading and annotation. So without further ado, let us begin. As one can see on the following slide, there are 5 parts to this whole presentation. And the first part deals with a general introduction to the ideas of the abject and the grotesque. As well as we give a brief definition of trauma, which is the subject of this conference in general. So in the segment following the introduction, we try to understand the satire in Catch 22 by taking some examples from the novel's passages. It is in the third segment that we tackle the form of the novel.
Afan, are you moving your slides? Because it's just the first slide that is visible on the screen.
Okay, I moved this is the slide I'm trying to show, table of contents. Can you see it?
No, we can just see the first slide. That is the title slide.
Okay, wait, I'm just trying to fix it. It will be better if I don't turn on slideshow.
Okay.
Okay, I hope you can see it now. Table of contents. Hello? Is the table of contents visible?
Yes, it is visible.
Okay, so I'll go through this once more. The introduction deals with the abject and the grotesque, which is a psychoanalytical idea from psychoanalytical criticism. There's a brief definition of trauma, which is borrowed from somewhat from the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual as prepared by the American Psychiatric Association. The second segment deals with the specifics of the novel itself, and some chapters have been subjected to a close reading. And the third segment deals with examples of circular logic and black comedy, and as we see them in Catch 22. Now, in the fourth segment, we can see that we attempt to explore the other forms of media that exhibit black comedy as a genre and try to see to what extent does it borrow from traumatic experience. Now, so we go to the first segment, which is introduction. We introduce all to the idea of the abject, as distinguished from the subject and the object. Julia Kristeva, in an exceedingly poetic paper, Approaching Abjection, sees abjection as an ultimately unassailable reality, contiguous with the subject, not detached from the object. Examples could be those items that are disgusting, banal, unclean, and impure, but irremovable, such as the corpse or urine. The grotesque, on the other hand, as Andrew Stott presents to us in his book Comedy, is a conception of the very abjection in terms of ridicule and laughter. It is through the grotesque, it could be argued, that the abject becomes somewhat more tolerable. The grotesque is the stepping stone between the ugly and the funny. And this is what ultimately leads us to the notion of gallows humor. Now, coming to the definition of trauma, it could be argued arises from the subject's confrontation with the ugly, the obscene, or the tabooed. It could be incestuous. It could be an incestuous encounter, a violent massacre, or even something which has become increasingly banal, like a parent's incessant scolding and corporal discipline. Traumatic experience gives rise to what we have understood in the field of psychiatry to be psychological disorders such as acute stress disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Moving on to the next segment, we bring focus to the subject of this paper in particular, which is Cash 22. We have with us the notion of satire, particularly satire on modern warfare. Now, as discussed, traumatic experience can arise from first-hand encounter with violence, and no period in history has been more littered with extreme violence and massacres than the two world wars. The author Joseph Heller was himself a soldier in the second of these wars, and his traumatic experience reflects in his writing as well. The representation of trauma makes his work relatable to a large section of the population that participated in the Second World War, and even makes Catch 22 palpable and popular to the later generation that participated in the Vietnam War leading up to the mid-1970s. Based around one American soldier, Captain John Ucedi, alongside a large ensemble of other characters, it is fragmented episodic account of his experience carrying out various missions for the United States. The themes in the novel are centered around greed for power, survival, and futility of the human conflict. A theme contiguous to the notion of trauma is that of paranoia, which is also expressed in this novel. Having discussed the content of the novel, we come to the form, where we get to see most of the black comedy in action. As one can read from the slide, there are several examples in the passages of the book which show circular logic and black comedy, both of which contribute to the humor of the novel. These two recurring ideas are played to a considerable degree, and as we get to see the horrible events unfold, we are desensitized by many jokes and witticisms that barely sugarcoat the violence on the pages. All this is the product of dark humor, and it inevitably arises from trauma the characters are facing. Now, the 20th century was no stranger to the absurd or the thirst for answers in an unanswering universe, an apparent lack of meaning that seemed to pervade our reality. This waiting for Godot, who would possibly never arrive, thankfully uplifted the author from his Philistine lack of culture and gave us incredible works of art in its wake. Some of these, particularly the works of art which exhibit black comedy, are discussed in the following slides. So first we have the example of Monty Python. Monty Python was a pop culture phenomenon that set the standard for highbrow absurdist comedy in the 20th century. The recounting of the traumatic crucifixion of Jesus has been a cornerstone of Christianity. Life of Brian turns this idea on its head and plays it for laughs, causing both amusement and outrage across the Western world. Here, an innocent simpleton, Brian, is confused for the Christ and is eventually tortured by the Romans in his stead. The blasphemous black comedy in this movie is especially evident as arising from the trauma of crucifixion. When we move towards the east, as you can see on the slide, there's a familiar picture. We see there are examples of black comedy embedded within the ordinary. With a slice of life manga series, Crayon Shinchan seems to be a good example. It deals with the daily life of a 5-year-old boy named Shinosuke Nohara, who goes about poking his nose in inappropriate situations, which cause both laughter and disgust from the end of the audience. The abjection of daily life contributes to the black comedy of Crayon Shinchan, and the dark humor is testament to the success of the manga, which has been adapted to a widely broadcast animated series as well. So we have seen that media and literature in particular has the power to channel negativity into humor and amusement. This is not just restricted to books about the world like Cash 22, but also about religion, race, and the vagaries of daily life. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Afan. It was indeed enlightening. Now I would like to ask our chair to present his valuable comments on the paper. On to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Afan. I think this was too short to be, inviting. So I thought you would deal with the subject of your paper in some detail. But anyway, I mean, maybe in the interest of time. So this idea that the genre of black comedy developing from traumatic experience, that's what you wanted to actually present in the light of the novel Catch 22, right? Thank you so much for your presentation. But I was wondering, can you really put down this to traumatic experience alone? Because trauma, in that sense, is also quite ubiquitous. I mean, it's something that forms the basis of any literary work in one way or the other. So, putting down black comedy to traumatic experience alone, do you think would that be a better way of talking about or understanding black comedy as a genre in itself? But obviously, that point still holds water because in the overall architecture of the novel, right? I mean, one can clearly see that the kind of context circumstances under which Heller has written this novel, right? Particularly a war, right? And therefore, one can easily attempt a reading, on these lines. But I was wondering if you have thought about really about trauma. I mean, reducing black comedy to traumatic experience. Do you think would that be a kind of an adequate way of talking about this genre itself? Not particularly this novel, but the novel also lends itself to several kinds of readings, and you're entirely, up on the mark, not wide of the mark, but really, you're really hit the nail on its head when you said that it's talks about traumatic experience, right? But my question was a of a general character regarding the genre that you actually picked up on. Okay, so maybe you can answer the question. Maybe I don't know how you have organized it, Ufuk. Are they responding to their questions right away or towards the end of their presentation?
So right after your comments, the questions would be taken.
Okay, Afan. So did you get my point?
So your point is that we cannot restrict the message of the book or the idea of the book to black comedy. Also, there's
Not
another corollary point.
actually, the genre of black comedy as such, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So
You mentioned
of course,
two things, sir.
right. The genre as such, putting that down to traumatic experience, right? Because this paradox of, say, for example, tragic pleasure or finding hilarity in the horrifying and so on and so forth, is something that has existed in literature, in literary cultures, right? For a long period of time, right? I mean, probably it's as old as literature, right? I mean, the element dark humor, dark comedy, and so on and so forth. And so that is what I asked. Black comedy, putting it down to traumatic experience as such, right? And considering it as simply in terms of trauma alone, would that be wouldn't that be a little reductive?
Yes, sir.
As far as
I agree with your point, and I think that if we try to look beyond if we don't contain ourselves in the box of trauma itself, we can see that there are other factors that not just the book itself, but if we try to look at the other factors that influence comedy. For example, the general understanding of a society. For example, if a society is more regressive, then there might not even be comedy at all. There might be no sense of humor. Some societies don't have a sense of humor. That's the reality of a lot of countries and a lot of repressive environments. However, I would like to say that it's one of the factors that do influence trauma, is one of the factors that does influence comedy in the dark or in the bleak sense in which I am addressing this book as. For example, if I'm to give another example outside the book, the confines of this book, there was the World Trade Center attacks, which happened in 2000, and some of the stand-up comedians that were born after in that generation, they to joke about these things, despite it being a very traumatic experience for them. Like they joke about their fathers being killed, they joke about all of these things. So I believe trauma is at least one of the contributing factors, if not the only contributing factor, to the genre of black comedy. If I hope that answers your question, sir. I may be wrong.
okay, good.
Okay, thank you, sir, and thank you, Afan. We have a question from Barira Sumbul. And she asks, in what ways does Joseph Heller's personal experience as a World War II veteran contribute to the development of Black comedy in Catch 22?
A very good question. If you have because a lot of things that I said in the paper and in my presentation, they were partly written in the slide and partly I said them. So the examples that I've given in the text, in the paper or in the presentation, they are all there for everyone to see. So if we look at his experience, John Yossarian, who's the main character of the story, his experience as a warrior, I'm sorry, I'm saying warrior, a soldier, who flew planes and carried out missions for the United States. He attempted at killing a lot of. There's a particular chapter in the book, and there's one more thing that I forgot to probably emphasize, which is that this is a satire primarily. So a lot of exaggeration ensues in the pages of this book. So what we see is might not correspond directly to the events in the World War, but it might come close to it in the form of satire. So I hope that if you look at the chapter 39 of this book, which I have subjected to a close reading, there is a scene in 29, sorry, there is a scene in which they bombard an Italian village atop a mountain. And they do it. It's a completely pointless mission because it carries out no benefit to the US government, or it doesn't affect the enemy in any way. However, they still do it. And because they do it, it is one of the features of how the meaning or the absurdity, the lack of meaning or absurdity arises out of such traumatic experiences. So I hope that answers somewhat what she's trying to say.
Okay, thank you, Afan, and thank you, sir. So we will quickly move on to the next.
One more word. Afan, you actually began with Kristeva's this very famous notion of abjection, and that was really quite opposite. But maybe you could have developed that point,
Sir.
Because at the end of the towards the end of your presentation, probably that didn't come out quite,
It was not very cohesive. It was not very cohesive.
And I would also urge you to look at Lacan, because Lacan's idea of this abjection, right? As the constitutive outside of the norm, right? The outside which actually beyond the pale, the notion of the be something being beyond the pale or outside of the fold, right? So maybe you can, because they are all speaking to each other, Kristeva, Lacan, they're all speaking to each other, they are in conversation with each other, and probably you can develop this idea and fine-tune your points
Yes, sir.
by
Definitely.
giving it a solid theoretical foundation. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So congratulations on your paper.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you so much. So the next presenter is Miss Aditi Joshi from the University of Delhi, and she will be presenting her paper titled Unveiling the Characteristics of Trauma through Toni Morrison's Beloved. So on to you, Aditi Joshi.
Thank you so much. Am I audible properly?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay, so I'll be sharing my screen. And I'm sorry I won't be able to turn on my camera, otherwise I won't be able to share the screen properly. Is my screen visible? Is my screen visible?
Yes, it is visible.
Okay, I'll start now. It was not a story to pass on. They forgot her like a bad dream. It was not a story to pass on, so they forgot her, like an unpleasant dream during a troubling sleep. This is not a story to pass on. By and by, all trace is gone, and what is forgotten is not only the footprints, but the water too, and what it is down there. Morrison's tender portrayal of trauma ascends to an unparalleled apex in the concluding chapter of Beloved. This story is not to be passed on, she emphasizes, while culminating in Seth, a character who embodies the essence of a collective struggle. Seth's world of trauma is in the form of a distorted identity, a fragmented psyche, and a hazy memory. She attempts to reconcile with herself, but is it that easy? Where does trauma begin? Where does it end? And where does it find recluse after a trauma survivor heals? Is trauma even real, or is it all just in the head? Well, I don't have answers to all of those questions, but what I do know is that Morrison has created a paradox for us readers. She says that this story is not to be passed on, but the fact that this novel has been subjected to countless academic discussions stands as a testimony to Morrison's understanding and sensitive depiction of trauma. So today, I will try to understand as well as explain some characteristics of trauma that correspond with Beloved by Toni Morrison, starting with the characteristic of trauma through different models. Beginning with the first topic, I would like to introduce you to the concept of post-traumatic slave syndrome. This concept was developed in 2001 by Dr. Joy DeGruy. Writing in her doctoral thesis, she says that African Americans sustain traumatic injury as a direct result of slavery and continue to be injured by traumas caused by the society's policies of inequality, racism, and oppression. As the name suggests, this concept is an extension of PTSD arising from unresolved trauma due to the experience of slavery. And this is seen in Seth in the following ways. First, she carries the weight of intergenerational trauma as seen in her interactions with her mother. Seth's interactions with her mother are limited but relevant. They show us how Seth longs to be with her mother. However, having endured unspeakable trauma, she is unable to remember the lessons her mother taught. This also shows the effect of slavery and how it has impacted language. Seth cannot remember her own language. Emotional numbness and avoidance. Seth is avoidant and dismissive of her trauma throughout the novel. She tells baby Suggs, "That's all you let yourself remember." Seth does not realize the extent of her trauma, and if she does, she avoids talking about it. Flashbacks and rememories, these intrusive elements disrupt her reality. Flashbacks are common in people with PTSD. However, Morrison uses rememory, a term coined by her. She uses rememory as a tool to explore the past and its traumatic impact on all characters. On many occasions, Seth is overwhelmed by her flashbacks and intrusive memories. Beloved's arrival is a significant example of rememory. Her presence disrupts the linear narrative of the novel. Now, let us talk about Cathy Caruth's model of trauma. This is a relatively new contribution to the field of trauma studies. Caruth takes inspiration from past pioneers like Jean-Martin Charcot and controversial neurologist Sigmund Freud. I will be talking about three main characteristics of Cathy Caruth's model corresponding to Seth's character, starting with dissociation and fragmentation of the psyche. Morrison's exemplary use of a nonlinear narrative structure demonstrates Seth's fragmented psyche. This is seen in the extremely gradual unfolding of Seth's actions and her past life. A picture of Beloved's infanticide is not painted until the 16th chapter. This reflects the hurt and pain Seth has experienced in her life. Morrison writes, "Every mention of her past life hurt. Everything in it was painful or lost. It was unspeakable." Second is the concept of belatedness and delay in trauma response. The concept of belatedness has been derived from Freud's concept of deferred action. Deferred action is a concept related to the reconstruction of childhood memories and the influence of past events on the present. Belatedness refers to the delayed or postponed understanding of traumatic events. According to Caruth, belatedness is the retroactive understanding of the events. A significant example of this is Seth's realization of her own actions. In the moment of committing a murder, she is unable to think straight. It is only after the 20th chapter that she fully understands the consequences of infanticide. Cathy Caruth says that overwhelming nature of trauma has the capacity to disrupt normal cognitive processes, leading to a state of disconnection or delayed response. Next is avoidance and refusal to address trauma. Seth's refusal to talk about her past in front of Denver and Poldy show that Seth is not ready to address her trauma. The gradual unfolding of events and the fragmented narrative throughout the novel contributes to Seth's avoidance. Next, I would like to talk about Beloved and Seth. So before that, I would also like to talk about Beloved's arrival and how it impacts Seth. So basically, when Beloved arrives, Seth, Denver, and Poldy are coming back from a carnival, and Seth is found outside their house, and she is dripping wet because she has just emerged from the ocean, and immediately Seth Seth gets this uncontrollable urge to urinate, and as she starts to go inside her house, she gets this urge is very overwhelming, so she has to pee in the backyard, and she refers to herself as a horse. And this also shows their connection and how the presence of beloved impacts Seth. Even if Seth is not able to understand why she is being so impacted by beloved, her body remembers. And this concept of the mind not being able to remember certain things consciously, but the body remembering, has also been talked about in the book called The Body Keeps the Score. And now I would like to focus on the relationship. So beloved arrives as the physical manifestation of Seth's trauma. She's a constant reminder of Seth's actions. Beloved still bears a mark under her chin where she was murdered, and it's a sign of the murder. This mark reflects the intense trauma that haunts Seth. However, Beloved can also be seen as an extension of Seth herself. Beloved represents the 60 million and more who remain unnamed. Just like Seth, she represents the struggle of the collective. There is a lingering sadness around Beloved. She is the figurine of the women who were called beloved in the daylight and bitched during the night. And now I would like to talk a little about the allure of trauma in Beloved's character. Morrison portrays Beloved as an alluring character. She has flawless skin and long black hair. She wants to be touched on the inside part. She wants agency. But seeing Seth's infatuation with Beloved, I wonder why she's portrayed as an alluring character. Seth goes beyond her limits to make up for Beloved's murder. She is infatuated with Beloved. Her relentless devotion to Beloved starts causing a mental and physical decline in her. Through Beloved, she is forced to confront her feelings. Seth's inability to walk out of the vicious cycle of trauma is not too rare. There is a relationship between Seth and Beloved that transcends trivial maternal ties. Seth is absorbed by Beloved's aura. This is why Beloved is referred to as the best thing of Seth. Beloved is a constant reminder of Seth's traumatic life. She keeps Seth trapped in the cycle of trauma. Lastly, I would like to talk about Beloved's absence and the end of the novel. By the time the novel ends and Beloved disappears, Seth is distraught. There is an absence not just at 124, that is the name of Seth's house, but also in the reader's mind. Why did Beloved come here? Was her presence necessary for Paul D and Seth to find their tomorrow together? Her absence hurts the heart. Her absence is more than just a trembling house or the red angry light. It is hurtful, and anything coming back to life hurts. Seth's healing process is hard. Morrison understands this. The last chapter ends with a sense of resolution and potential of healing for Seth. Beloved soon becomes a thing of the past. Her absence shakes the reader to the core, leaving behind the fading residue of trauma to be forgotten later. But in the end, she has claimed, but she is not claimed. She is disremembered and unaccounted for. By and by, all trace is gone. There is not the breath of the disremembered and the unaccounted, but the wind in the caves or the spring ice thawing too quickly. No one knows her name, and this is not a story to pass on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aditi. It was indeed a very insightful presentation.
Thank
Now
you.
I would like to ask our esteemed chair to present his comments on this paper.
Thank you, Aditi Joshi. Am I correct? Aditi, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, for your paper on Toni Morrison's world famous novel Beloved. Indeed, this is a novel which is very difficult to read. Beloved is perhaps one of the few novels in world literature which is known for its difficulty in reading. And particularly, this is a book that one can't finish reading, especially because one has to go through this very traumatic, experience of kind of reading this novel itself. Particularly when we get to that point where Seth is, the scene describing the slaughter of her daughter in order to save her from slavery, right? So usually this novel is in fact, personally speaking, something that I also have put aside, for many years, and then a novel that I have finished reading in fits and starts. Unlike other novels, which you may read and devour at a stretch, right? So I think the very experience of reading this novel brings to the fore the kind of the layers of traumatic experience that dovetail, that constitute the architecture of this, the internal architecture of this, the narrative of Beloved. So Atithi's paper has succeeded in bringing out those elements, albeit briefly. So I appreciate that. I was also wondering if, because memory also plays a very important role in this novel, right? And because Said's own experience of slavery is so crucial to the employment of this novel. And therefore post-memory as well, because post-memory is about how we remember other people's memories, right? I mean, how because slavery is post-memory is something that we can use to talk about people's experiences of slavery also. And I think maybe those elements, especially regarding memory and post-memory, could also probably help Aditi to thicken her description of traumatic experience in the novel. So Aditi, had you thought about these aspects as well, or just that in the interest of time you narrowed, you wanted to focus on only in the trauma, but because trauma can't be talked about in isolation, right?
So basically, to answer your question, first of all, I would like to say that reading this novel was actually a very interesting experience. I finished this novel in like 2 days because I had my examinations as well, and this was in the syllabus. But also because my teacher was explaining this novel and I did not want any spoilers. So I wanted to get through this as soon as possible. But those 2 days were really interesting because I had to put down the book like all the time. And yeah, like it was an experience on
You're
its own.
saying interesting. I'm really fascinated by that because it was really traumatic. Like it was very difficult to read. It's a novel which is very difficult to read for people.
Yeah.
So
I started reading it, and the scene where Seth is talking about how she had to, if she had like if she had 10 more minutes, she would have gotten the word dearly also engraved on the headstone. That was the first time I was like really sad, and this book really hit me during that time. But I had to finish it, and I finished it, and I finished it last year, but I still have been thinking about it. And yeah, I wanted to talk about this novel just not just to like present it in the paper, but also to process it on my own as well, because it was a traumatic experience reading this novel, but it also provides a sort of resolution for people who have experienced traumatic situations. So that, and I did not focus on post memory and other aspects because I definitely wanted to focus on how Morrison uses the characteristics of trauma through Beloved to bring out these things, because I think talking about the process of remembering or forgetting or memory or post memory, I think that is important. But before that, I think we need to understand that how these things are put forth in the novel, how is language used, and how the situations are used, or how Morrison presents the semantics of the situation. And also a lot of people also say that writing this novel itself is sort of a post memory or rememory for Toni Morrison itself. So I think that's also very interesting because the way she presents the past in the novel is also interesting, because she's also not able to present it to its full extent. When we get to the scene where Stampede is explaining how Seth had murdered her child, it is also explained in mythological terms. It is also not explained in absolute terms. So I think that also creates a dreamy like situation, and we do not really get to know what actually happened. So I think that's also really interesting.
Yeah. I asked that question because towards the you also mentioned this phrase, residue of the past, right?
Yeah.
Because and that actually meshes quite nicely with this, understanding of post memory as well. So, and probably in order to complicate, your reading, because it's a very complicated novel and one can't just talk about it in simple, crude, and vulgar terms, right? So therefore, because it's a very complicated plot, and therefore, in order to complicate our understanding of the novel, right? Probably this element of memory will help you add more flesh to your understanding of trauma as well, right? Because
Yeah.
they are not they're not very different things in experience, right?
Yeah.
Also information. So yeah, and you also use this phrase, because the residue of the past is a very interesting phrase, right? I mean, in your abstract also, I think towards
Yeah.
the end, you use this trauma not merely as a residue of the past, but how they continue to linger in the present, right?
Yeah.
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 So anyway, congratulations
Thank you.
once again.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you, Aditi. I think we have a question from Javeria. How does Morrison's writing style convey a sensual relationship between Seth and Beloved? And what does it reveal about all-encompassing whole of trauma on Seth?
That's a really good question. So thank you for the question, first of all. Secondly, Morrison's writing style is actually very poetic. And I think that is why, when you get to the point where Seth and Beloved start to develop a relationship, throughout the novel, it has been reiterated that Seth's priority is like to take care of her children. But when Beloved arrives, that is like not her priority. Her priority is Beloved. And I think that really shows the way that trauma, first of all, overtakes Seth. Secondly, the way Beloved wants to feel something. She wants to feel like a woman, or she wants to feel like a person, or she wants to have her own agency. So she says to Paul D, you need to touch me on the inside part, and you need to call my name. And that also does something to Paul D. So the if I'm remembering correctly, the red heart or the red tin box also opens. So I think that is also really interesting, because there's this gray ground, whether they are like relationship between Seth and Beloved, whether it is like maternal bond or it is more than that. So I think that is a gray ground or a gray area. And I think trauma is not just about it's not just about having these memories, it's also about how your body impacts you. And I think the way that Beloved lingers over Seth, or the way she starts physically affecting Seth, the way that Seth starts declining physically as well as mentally. There's this line in the book where it says that Beloved got bigger and bigger while Seth started shrinking, and Beloved is actually pregnant at that time. So I think that also shows the way that not only Seth is being physically affected, but also Beloved, she is pregnant. And also the way that Beloved was Seth's child, so also the fetus. So Beloved starts eating her own mother. So that is also a sort of analogy that we can put to understand the all-encompassing hold of trauma on Seth. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Aditi. Thank you so much. Now we will quickly move to the next paper. So next we have a joint paper by Nausheen Nizami and Talbia Khan from Aligarh Muslim University, and the paper is titled Exploring the Immigrant Experience, an Analysis of the Duality of Trauma and Hope in Select Diasporic Songs. So I would like to call both of you.
Thank you, Ufuk. Thank
I'll
you.
just share my screen. Is my screen visible?
Yes, your screen is visible.
Oh, thank you. Good evening. I am Nosheen Nizami, and today I shall be presenting my paper along with Kalbia Khan. The title of our paper is Exploring the Immigrant Experience, an analysis of the duality of trauma and hope in select diasporic songs. The immigrant experience has a very multidimensional and multifaceted nature, but the duality of trauma and hope remains the same throughout. This paper aims to analyze the representation of trauma as well as hope in select diasporic songs, namely Alien by Coldplay, A Safe Place to Land by Sarah Bareilles and John Legend, and Immigrant Song by Keith and Kristen Getty. The paper will look at how the songs provide an apt representation of the challenges faced by the immigrants when they leave their homeland to come to a foreign country, all the while showcasing their hope and determination to make this new place a home. Further, the paper will look at the physical, emotional, and psychological trauma the push factors of migration cause, as well as how, at the same time, the pull factors provide rays of hope for a better life as depicted in the three diasporic songs.
The International Organization for Migration defines a migrant as any person who is moving or has moved across an international border or within a state away from his or her own habitual place of residence, regardless of the person's legal status, whether the movement is voluntary or involuntary, what the causes for the movement are, and what the length of the stay is. History shows that whether forced or voluntary, temporary or permanent, the phenomena of migration itself in all its traumatic existence includes the wish for a better life. The decisions of families to leave their home countries are often related to what are described as push and pull factors. Violence, persecution, poverty, food security, and limited educational and health services might push people away from their home countries, while factors such as geographic proximity, economic security, education opportunities, safety, and networks may pull families towards another country.
Now let us look at the major points of the literature review. The term diaspora often appeals to the symbols of traumas of parting and displacement, and this is unquestionably a very significant characteristic of migrant involvement. However, diasporas are locations of optimism and fresh commencements as well. I quote unquote. I quote, according to Ernest Bloch, perhaps the most well known of the hope theorists, hope is the most human of all mental feelings, constituting the antithesis to despair, fear, and anxiety. We approach hope in a broad sense as an anticipation of the not yet, characterized by simultaneous potentiality and uncertainty. Approaching hope as an analytical framework thus implies examining both potentiality and uncertainty. A hope perspective enables us to analyze how visions of the good life or future are generated and distributed, and how horizons of possibility and expectation are linked to different places and temporalities, and explore how and whether migrants maintain or create a sense of anticipation of faith in the future in uncertain and precarious situations. I am.
So the first song that has been taken up for analysis is Aliens by the British rock band Coldplay, which was released on 6th of July 2017. The sci-fi song tells the story of aliens who are forced to flee their home planet and take refuge in planet Earth. The theme of the song revolves around the refugee crisis that plagued the world since the Syrian civil war began in 2011. The song offers an apt metaphor for migrants around the world who have been forced to flee their homelands, who have left their homes in search of a new home in an unknown place. In the animated video of the song, one can see a family of aliens fleeing their war torn planet. The saga of the alien family is a reflection of the traumatic experience of refugees who have to flee their homes due to war. Aliens here mean both the literal alien in the music video as well as the name given to any individual who is not a legal citizen of a country. The plight of aliens, both in the extraterrestrial sense as well as the alien human sense, and the meaning of whom are explored. The physical and emotional trauma of the aliens is depicted in the lyrics of the song. I quote, "We were just about to lose our home," unquote. Chris Martin sings, talking about the aliens escape from their homeland, I quote, in the dead of night, unquote, moving at the speed of light to escape their planet. Once they escape their homeland, they are lost and uncertain, merely, I quote, hovering without a home, unquote. The fact that they leave everything behind from their homes to the life they built there as a family shows the trauma that the refugees undergo when they have to completely uproot their lives and flee their country with nothing. The aliens just took photographs of their home with them, showing that they have deep attachments toward their homeland and also symbolizing that all that these people are left with are their memories. But at the same time, their act of taking these photographs with them show their hope that they would find a shelter for themselves, where they can build a home and look back at these photographs with a sense of nostalgia. The moment they leave their home terrain, the lyric shifts, addressing them, I quote, just an alien, for the very first time. The animated video then depicts the physical trauma and hardships that the aliens undergo in their journey to another country. They do come across different places during their journey, but are not welcome there. Aliens also offers hope, both in lyrics, I quote, if you want to, hold me tight, I unquote, and in visuals, when the family looks over a precipice to see a promising city below, I quote, oh, we just want to get home again, unquote. Martin sings. Here we see trauma and hope as two sides of the same coin. The physical and emotional trauma of leaving their home and longing to return back to their home, coinciding with the hope to make a life for themselves in a safe new land.
The next song taken up for analysis is A Safe Place to Land, the last track from Sarah Bareilles' 5th April 2019 album, Amidst the Chaos. The song is a ballad featuring John Legend and is in response to the 2018 immigrant crisis which gripped the United States. Through the song, one gets an insight into the journey the refugees embark on, a journey filled with hardships, searching for a safe place for themselves and their families. The challenges faced and the trauma endured by the immigrants in trying to establish a home in the United States of America has been portrayed using symbols and metaphors. The song begins with a tone of despair where there's only trauma and no hope. These people now need to leave their homes because it has become unsafe for them to stay there any longer. They are undoubtedly going through a lot of physical, emotional, and psychological trauma in their homeland, as portrayed through the lyrics. When holding your breath is safer than breathing, when the pain is all that they offer, like the kiss from the lips of a monster, when home is the belly of a beast. These people have left their home now and began a perilous journey towards America in search of safety. From here onwards, we see the juxtaposition of trauma and hope, both existing in the same situation. On one hand, the ocean is wild and the boat beneath is sinking, I quote unquote. They have lost all their possessions. They won't be able to take anything along with them except their families. The emotional trauma of leaving behind their homeland has been juxtaposed with the hope that their faith in the Lord is providing them. A hope that, I quote, surely someone will reach out a hand, I unquote, and show them, I quote, a safe place to land, unquote. For these refugees, hope is the only driving factor in the face of trauma. The song is a positive encouragement to the refugees, saying, I quote, you don't know who will catch you, but somebody will, unquote.
The last song that we have taken up for analysis is Immigrant Song, an Irish song by Keith and Kristen Getty, released on 12th of March 2022. It was written against the backdrop of the Irish War of Independence. The song echoes the story of Ruth, an immigrant widow who, having lost her husband in the war, has left everything behind to find a true home for herself. Her emotional trauma of leaving her home and what remained of her life behind can be seen when she is, I quote unquote, wandering as, I quote, as a stranger on the outside looking in, unquote. On her journey, she meets a mother who had also left everything behind and she left with, I quote, no one to call her own, unquote. They are both strangers, but their trauma unites them. The longing of a migrant as well as the hope of making a home for themselves is portrayed here, along with their loneliness. Their old destination, which they have both felt behind, had been a source and reminder of their trauma. But their new destination, which they seem to be moving towards, is a source of hope. A hope to move on and build, I quote, home so far from home, unquote. The first word is an echo of hope, whereas at the same time, the last word is an echo of the emotional trauma of leaving their home behind. Here, home is signifying both a place for physical settlement as well as a state of spiritual contentment, because it is their faith in the Lord, I quote, the Redeemer, unquote, that keeps them moving forward despite their trauma. Thus, we can see three songs might have been used ways to portray migration, but the theme of trauma and hope is common in all three of them.
Be it the extraterrestrials migrating to another planet in Aliens, the people migrating to America in A Safe Place to Land, or Ruth and a mother undertaking a spiritual migration in search of contentment. What is common between them is that no matter why or how their journeys are, they have all set out on one. The push and pull factors for each of them are different, but they all resonate their trauma and hope respectively. The first two songs also try to give us a message that in this world, we are all essentially aliens somewhere and somehow or the other. The immigrant song is also, in its essence, about the life of a person in the world. All of us are migrants. We are all facing the trauma of living in this world, and we all have to undertake our journeys in order to reach our final destination, our, I quote unquote, home. With this, we come to the end of our presentation. These are our references. Thank you.
Thanks to you.
Thank you, Nausheen and Talbia. So with this, I would like to call our esteemed chair. Please present your views on the paper.
Thank you, Nausheen and Talbia, for your paper on these wonderful songs capturing immigrant experience. And I'm particularly struck by the fact that this is a welcome departure from the earlier, previous two papers, because you have taken up for analysis a popular genre, song, and which is something usually strict, um, users of literature don't consider as a subject worthy of study and analysis. So there is a tendency to relegating these kinds of genres to a secondary status, right, when it comes to doing literature. So I appreciate the attempt that you have made to talk about songs at this conference, and I think one has to diversify the kinds of objects of analysis that we bring to our study and research, such that we can appreciate a wide range of ways in which people do literature, do culture, and so on and so forth. So I appreciate that. Also, this analysis has a kind of a sociological tinge to it, because you're talking about immigration and so on. Pull factors and push factors are things that often sociologists talk about quite eloquently and so on. So I appreciate that also. But then, trauma is part and parcel of life, as both of you are saying towards the end of your presentation. You ended on that note, and it is a universal, something of a universal experience, and nobody is even all of us are subject to trauma and vulnerable to trauma, and we are all precarious in one way or the other, right? All of us are precarious, and precarity, because trauma understood in a generalizable way, that is a shocking experience or a disturbing experience, and so on and so forth. So there is nothing surprising about trauma being the stuff of literature, because then if literature is about life, literature matters because life matters, in famous words of F.R. Lewis, right? Literature matters because life matters. And trauma is something, one of the most common stuff out of which our life, is made. And therefore, maybe one has to be a little, discriminate in the way one talks about literature and trauma, because otherwise, trauma is everywhere, and literature is actually maybe it's awash with trauma and traumatic experiences, because it is life in one way or the in one sense or the other. You remember Shelley's famous statement, Shelley's famous line, our saddest songs are those that tell of saddest thoughts. So it's saddest thought that makes great literature, right? And I'm also reminded of Nizar Qabani, who said regarding Arabic poetry that, Arabic, kalima meaning word, and dam'a meaning tear, right? And he says, talking about Arabic poetry, that Shelley is talking about his own poetry, right? So al-kalima wa dhamma, that is word and tears. These are twins, right? And the best of Arabic poetry actually comes out of the tears that emanate from the fingers of the poet, and so on and so forth. I mean, you will find similar instantiations, expressions elsewhere too. I mean, in almost all literary cultures. So yeah, so I was wondering, like, it's ubiquitous, and it is the stuff that out of which literature is made, and therefore one can probably talk about any work by focusing on some trauma or the other, right? So, isn't there a need? I mean, it's a question for all of us, to think about collectively. Isn't there a need for our being a little discriminate and, choosy, while, I mean, to use a not a very good word, but rather, to little choosy and discriminate when talking about literature and trauma. I mean, it's a open question. I'm wondering how you guys would take that question. Okay. Otherwise, thank you so much, and congratulations on your paper.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much,
sir.
sir. Okay, so we have a question from Varisha Ahmed. Could you explain this physical, emotional, and psychological trauma caused by the push factors of migration as depicted in the selected songs, and how they are juxtaposed with the pull factors that provide rays of hope for a better life?
Yes. When it comes to like what we are trying to establish here, we understand that the idea of trauma, it is very subjective, and the fact that what we are trying to do here is that we took up three songs, and we are trying to show that the instance or the way in which trauma might be depicted in various art forms might be different, but or maybe we can take up various other themes. Like, for example, we took up the part of diaspora. So if we take up any other, so what we are trying to establish here is that how there's a common thread that is binding us. There's the trauma that exists. Like trauma, we cannot actually define trauma in a very strict, like we cannot put it in a very strict box. So what we're trying to do here is then establish that thread, and we're also trying to show that uh, hope might be like a very sublime subject, we accept, but then at the same time what we're trying to show is that how trauma and hope, they do exist together, because there are times when, because despite all the trauma that a person is undergoing, there's a little facet of hope that keeps them going, though I will admit that it's not every time, but what we have taken up shows that. So that's what we are trying to establish. So when it comes about the psychological trauma, the emotional trauma, so we are showing how, like, the push factors that are there. So the people are having to uproot their lives, be it the aliens in the first song, or the people who are migrating to the US in the second song, or the the mother and Ruth going for their journey in the third song. What we are trying to show here is that how, the push factors, they are leaving their home. There's something that is like about, like, there's a great element of trauma about uprooting your entire life and then going to another place. And that psychological emotional trauma has been then shown as a juxtaposition with the hope, because if they are going to another place, I get that they're being forced to, or but at the same time there is an element of how they are hoping to settle into the new place. The fact that they're going to the new place shows a little element of hope as well, where they're thinking of settling, of building a life for themselves. So that's the juxtaposition that we're trying to show, and the duality existing. So, yeah.
Thank you, Nausheen. I hope, Varisha, that answers your question. With this, I'm guessing we don't have any other questions, so I would be quickly moving to the next presentation. And I would like to call Darshita Datta from Daulat Ram College, University of Delhi, to present her paper, Trauma, Memory and Post-Memory, Exploring the Character of Anjum in the Ministry of Utmost Happiness by Arundhati Roy. So, are you here, Darshita? Ms. Darshita Datta, are you here? Okay, she's here. All right, please unmute yourself. We cannot hear you. Darshita, are you able to hear me? Can you please unmute yourself? Okay. You're muted, actually. Okay.
Am I audible?
Yes, now you're audible. Please begin with the presentation.
Sure. I'm going to share my PPT now. I'm going to share the screen.
Okay.
Hello. I'm going to share the screen.
Okay.
Is it visible?
Yes, it is visible. Okay. You may start, please.
Okay. So, good evening, everyone. My name is Darshita Datta. My pronouns are she, her, and currently I am a second-year student of BA Honours English at Daulat Ram College, University of Delhi. The title of my paper is Trauma, Memory and Post-Memory, Exploring the Character of Anjum in the Ministry of Utmost Happiness by Arundhati Roy. I would now like to begin with it. Starting off with a short introduction of the novel, The Ministry of Utmost Happiness is the second work of fiction by the critically acclaimed Indian author activist Arundhati Roy. It was longlisted for the 2017 Man Booker Prize and weaves together the stories of a multitude of characters from diverse backgrounds, all of whom belong to India's structurally oppressed subaltern classes. Starting with the birth of the oldest character Anjum in the recently independent India and stretching to as recently as the late 2010s, the Ministry of Utmost Happiness, in a nutshell, is the history of modern India itself. About the character of Anjum. Anjum is one among the numerous protagonists of the novel. She is a transgender woman who was born intersex but was assigned the male gender at birth. Gender dysphoria and the construction of the self, so to speak, would cause her to leave her native home in Shahjahanabad, Old Delhi, at the mere age of 15 and shift to the nearby Khwabga, the House of Dreams, a brothel of transgender sex workers. However, not being able to achieve self-actualization even there, she would then reclaim the macabre space of a graveyard and call it home. This is where the reader gets to know her for the first time ever. Anjum's character is full of trauma, not only due to individual circumstances, but also due to social institutions such as gender, queerness, religion, and class. This is what I shall attempt to explore here. Memory and sexuality. So we first come to the obvious, memory and sexuality. Being a transgender woman, Anjum's queerness and the position it imposes upon her obviously leads to a lot of trauma and marginalization. Even in things as primordial as fairy tales and folk tales of childhood, Anjum very strongly questions the traditional gender norms and in fact desires more conventionally feminine gender roles. This is strongly evident in the given quote, obtained from chapter 2 in the book. Right from childhood to the present Anjum, who is an old lady, gender norms and the taboo of not being cishet would contribute to her trauma. Now we come to another factor, manifestations in private stories. Just as the previous example, which explored childhood stories told to the young Anjum, private stories and the subversion of language contributes to how sexuality and memory is manifested. Here is an example of Anjum telling stories and narratives to her adopted daughter. Through the subversion of language, through the deciphering, through the interpretation of situations in a more childproof manner, Anjum used to re-narrate her lifestyles and her lived realities in different ways, so as to retain the original essence, but still make it more child safe. Now we come to another aspect, memory and sexuality, subversion of language. The linguistic aspect of memory would be incomplete without speaking of private dialects. In Anjum's case, it is reflected through the all too famous phrases used by her and other members of her gharana. To quote the text, we have the half snide, half flirtatious hi used by the transgender women of the community. Moreover, with gesticulations complementing language, we have the following. She learned to exaggerate the swing in her hips when she walked and to communicate with the signature spread-fingered hijra clap. Hyperfemininity in this regard is used as subversion of body language, and is in a way intended to provoke the comfort of the cishet mainstream and at the same time assert community identity. Now we come to one of the last aspects relating to Anjum's memory and post-memory, which is history. Oftentimes, acts of historical significance, whether real or mythical, are used by groups, both oppressed and dominant, to assert community identity and seek existential validation. In Anjum's case, two instances where this can be remarkably noticed are perhaps her father, the family patriarch, tracing the family lineage back to Mongol times, and Ustad Kulsum B, the head of the Gharana, tracing the Khwabga's history all the way back to the Emperor Shah Jahan's times. In this context, the author Arundhati Roy writes of the Ustad's perspective. When Shehenshah Shah Jahan built the Red Fort and the Jama Masjid, when he built this walled city, he built a little Haveli too. For us, always remember, we are not just any hijras from any place. We are the hijras of Shah Jahanabad. Of course, this exclamation of grandeur is a sharp contrast to the present condition of impoverishment, which the specialty of the Khwabga occupies. But of course, this is a manifestation of post-memory. And another example which I have cited in this slide is the light and sound show about the Mughals in the Red Fort. To quote the text, then suddenly, amidst those soft, happy lady sounds would come the clearly audible, deep, distinct, rasping coquettish giggle of a court eunuch. With history and collective memory or post-memory coalescing into one, perhaps nothing could better sum up the validation of the generation after, so to quote Hirsch of Ustad Kulsum B, Anjum et al., than this. The moment passed in a heartbeat, but it did not matter. What mattered was that it existed. To be present in history, even as nothing more than a chuckle, was a universe away from being absent from it, from being written out of it altogether. A chuckle, after all, could become a foothold in the sheer wall of the future. It is pertinent to remember here that in Anjum's present world, that they, the hijras of Shah Jahanabad, were thrice marginalized on the basis of gender, religion, and impoverishment. So to be linked, albeit infirmly, to something as grand as a pan-continental empire of yore was a huge step in contemporary representation and post-memory validation. Anjum in this regard was no less than her father, who used to painstakingly trace family roots to the grand old Mongols and Genghis Khan. Now we come to the aspect of the intersection of marginalized identities insofar trauma, memory, and post-memory are concerned. As is obvious, the marginalized identities of religion, gender, and class intersect in the character of Anjum, and are very much pivotal in shaping the trajectory of her life. A pertinent point here is the importance of not only the personal trauma that Anjum has gone through because of the various prejudices associated with the aforementioned identities, but also of the post-memory and the conflict that they evoke as a whole in the shared memory of the community or communities that Anjum belongs to. Take, for instance, Anjum's personal memories of the 2002 Gujarat riots. To quote Roy, "Don't kill her, brother. Killing Hijras being bad luck." Anjum was faced by a Hindu mob who did not kill her only because they believed that killing Hijras in their religion was considered as bringing ill luck. Of course, this caused unimaginable pain and trauma to Anjum, messing up and scattering her personal memory. To quote the text, she tried to unknow that little detail as she rattled through her private fault. Parallelly, it would cause the after effect, the post-memory that would reverberate not only to the generation that faced it, but also the younger crop of characters in the story. To quote, "The seafaring men sheathed their swords, laid down their tridents, and returned meekly to their working lives." With this, I would like to conclude my presentation. I would like to mention a very important point here. When speaking of the child-proof bedtime tales Anjum used to narrate to Zainab, Roy had written, "They were Anjum's somewhat maladroit attempts to make up for lost time, to transfuse herself into Zainab's memory and consciousness, to reveal herself without artifice, so that they could belong to each other completely." Indeed, memory and history are inextricably linked, so much so that it is not impossible for one to diffuse into the other. In the case of the character of Anjum, her memory and the post-memory of the various communities she belongs to is widened by her trauma. Even though, of course, trauma is a highly sensitive and personal process, the matter of the fact is that trauma cannot exist in vacuum. In Anjum's case, the marginalization of her various social identities greatly contributed to her personal trauma, and thereby the post-memory of these institutions. From gender-based dysphoria and oppression, to religion-selective cruelty and discrimination, to even the transformation of a mere graveyard into a home on account of abject poverty, the character of Anjum, a highly subaltern figure, is very strongly representative of not only memory and gender, but also the extension of sex and sexuality to other socio-psychological processes, thus converting the other two systems of religion and class into gendered processes.
Thank you, Darshita. I would like to call Seth to give your valuable comments on Darshita's presentation.
Thank you, Darshida, for your presentation. So this was a reading of Arundhati Roy's famous second novel, The Ministry of Utmost Happiness. Although I couldn't follow the entirety of your presentation because of some technical reasons, I think the text was also a little content heavy, and maybe it would be, it would look more user friendly and audience friendly if you could keep your text a little, light. And so, in any case, I'm glad that your presentation brought in all the key words of this conference, trauma, memory, and post-memory at one go, and in order to offer a reading of the character of Anjum in Arundhati Roy's novel. And the paper also, displays a strong, theoretical framework, and I appreciate that. I was wondering, this intersection of identities in Anjum's case, how, I mean, various forms of difference, not just gender and sexuality, but also her ethnicity and so on. How does this intersection of identities or forms of difference contribute to the kind of marginality or and even humiliation and so on that she experiences, or in the novel as characterized by Luthadi in her, in this novel. So could you offer some light on that?
Of course, sir. As I have mentioned in the presentation, four different marginalized identities intersect in the character of Anjum. The first among this is gender, of course, because she's a woman. The second is the queerness of her identity, because, as I've said, she was born intersex, but she was assigned male at birth, but she identifies as a trans woman. Then thirdly, we have religion, because she is a Muslim woman in India, and that makes her a part of the subaltern. And fourthly, we have poverty. Anjum, like most trans women in the country, suffers from abject impoverishment.
Say what? Suffers from.
She, like most trans women in the country, suffers from abject impoverishment. She suffers from poverty.
Okay, abject poverty. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, Ufuk. Thank you.
I think Ufuk is not audible.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much, Darshita and sir. So I think that we have a question from Hina Kaushik. What societal factors contribute to Anjum's development from her natal home and her subsequent journey to the Fabga, the House of Dreams?
Okay. So in the novel, it has been written that the Fabga, a house of dreams, is a brothel of transgender sex workers, and it was actually located quite near Anjum's home. She actually fled to the Fabga when she was 14 or 15. Like in the story, Anjum used to always see the ladies of the Khwabga stepping out of the threshold, going about their day-to-day lives, shopping in the bazaars, or just roaming about. And she used to feel a sense of actualization, of living through them, of, vicariously realizing her gender identity. And that is what made her flee. There was no, there was nothing, there was no process of obtaining permission of the parents or something, because obviously these things would not have been possible. So the one and only option left for the young Anjum was to flee the constrictions of the space that bound her, and do what she felt would allow her freedom at such a young age. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Darshita. It really feels good that you're just mere bachelors with such a good presentation.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so that's I think that now we will move to the last paper for this session, and it is by Shivangi Bhasin, Ambedkar University, and she will be presenting her paper titled "Constructing the Self Through Grief, Time, and Memory." Okay.
Yeah, let me just share my screen. I hope my presentation is visible.
Yes, it is visible.
Okay. Okay. So, hello everybody. I am Shivangi Bhasin, and today I want to present on Joan Didion's memoir, The Year of Magical Thinking, and the topic of my presentation is Reconstructing the Self in Memory. So, just to give a bit of a brief background of the text, The Year of Magical Thinking, according to Susanna Egan, is a work of autothanatography, which is a subgenre of life writing that deals with themes of death.
While I was reading this memoir, I was very taken aback by the way it was written, because the prose was very arresting, and it was very discombobulated, and it seemed to represent Didion's own psychic breakdown upon her husband's death. Uh, the term magical thinking is an anthropological term, but Didion recontextualizes it to use it as a coping mechanism in which she tries to bring her dead husband back, even if it means that she has to find him in only her memories. So finally, I just want to give a sense of what this presentation is going to be about, and that is the examination of the impact of grief on one's memory, the way one experiences time when one is grieving, and the self that emerges as a result. And all of this I want to do in the context of life writing. So there is a specific way in which Didion talks about grief in her memoir. So she talks about the two different kinds of grief that she had experienced in life thus far. One was grief that came despite anticipating loss, and one that came unannounced. So the one that she anticipated, for her, was a distant fact, and it did not interfere with the dailiness of her life, while the death of her husband, which came unannounced, weakened her knees, blinded her eyes, and obliterated the dailiness of her life. So I now want to focus on the idea of illness, wellness, and health. And here I want to bring in Oliver Sacks, who was a British neurologist. And he observes, and this is an observation he gleans from Freud, and he says that one's health and one's illness cannot be understood and cannot be treated as they are objectively, but they must be treated as they are experienced by the human being. So therefore, the human being becomes the center, the focal point of both the doctor and their own experience. So this idea is central to Didion's work, because in her memoir, she constantly tries to find some kind of consolation in her grief, and she realizes that she does not feel good, or like merely defining grief or merely understanding it does not console her, but expressing it does. And so there's another interesting phenomena related to grief and trauma, which is one that Freud notes in Mourning and Melancholia, where he says that mourning looks a lot like melancholia, which today we understand as depression. However, it is not understood as an illness, perhaps, or because of its universality. And this is something Sir was mentioning before, that grief is a universal idea. However, it is not seen as a pathology, even though it looks a lot like a pathology. So grief, like I've written here, is an appraisal. Appraisal means emotions which are elicited upon one's perception of an event. So it is an emotional reaction which is analogous to an illness, and it is informed by her biography, which means that it is idiosyncratic. And this idiosyncrasy, it represents her subjective responses to the world around her. So now I want to move on to the idea of time. So it's very interesting to note, and Didion says this herself in her work, that she remembers or considers her marriage to her husband to be a sort of vessel in time, wherein after he dies, she realizes that until his death, she had not aged in her own mind. That is, her self-perception was that of the woman had married her husband when they were very young. So this temporal dislocation again has to do with her own idiosyncratic and personal experience of grief. And this grief for her is very debilitating, and she tries to run away from it, but she realizes that the more she tries to fight it, the more she gets sucked into what she calls the vortex of memory. And time is also another interesting, there's another way in which time plays a role in her work, which is that she puts a lot of emphasis on time to heal her wounds and to give her some sense of relief, but it never does. And so she realizes that in truth, her arc, she will not heal, she will not become whole, she will not suddenly forget, and that she has to accept that her arc is precisely this lack of improvement. And also, the idea of time changes while she is grieving, because according to St. Augustine, time is circular, it's non-linear, and it's three-dimensional. But when she grieves, it becomes one-dimensional and it's reduced to only the singular dimension of the past, which is of memory. So memory also is a very complicated arena for Didion, because what happens is that when she goes back in memories and tries to resuscitate John, she realizes that whatever she remembers of him no longer makes it, it's no longer, she can no longer decipher the meaning as quickly as she thought she could. Now suddenly the John in her memories becomes more opaque. He's no longer the person that she thought she knew very well. And so she has to accept that her memories of John are not just her own, and that John was not, just because she spent her entire life with this man doesn't mean that she fully knew him. Also, and so therefore there is no way that she can ever know herself. And then her memory is also complicated by the fact that she believes that life and death are stark opposites, but in the realm of memory they both exist. So she's unable to reconcile with this paradox. And so we see in her memoir that there is a repetitive foray back into memory, and this is essentially an expression of a disordered self experiencing collapsed time. And it's an attempt to try to control the past, to try to understand the present. And it's essentially showing the fragmentation that's happening within herself. So now I want to move on to the idea of form and how it relates to meaning. So the idea and her preoccupation with form is in fact a representation of her encounter with chaos. And this preoccupation in life writing can be understood as her attempt to reconstruct herself, and this self that she assumed to be singular, whole, and ordered until she experiences this grief, this awful loss. And so this preoccupation with form is essentially her attempt to resolve this tension between order and between chaos, where chaos is admitted, it's allowed to interact with order, and a new form comes into being. And this form is precisely the memoir that we have, which is irregular, it's disruptive, and it's repetitive. So now I want to talk about writing itself and the role of self-pity in writing. So what she realizes is that while she's grieving, she turns to writing and she turns to literature as a means to reorder her thoughts and in order to understand what happened. And memory, as a result, becomes a very important tool in this process. And this writing process, on the one hand, is urgent, but on the other, it's deeply disorienting. So I want to quote Samuel Beckett here, where he says, "There is nothing to express, nothing with which to express, nothing from which to express, no power to express, no desire to express, together with the obligation to express." So while she's writing, she encounters the problem of self-pity. So this she considers to be a problem because she has a deep abhorrence for this state. And in fact, her entire novel is her trying to mediate from dissolving into this puddle of self-pity, and she attempts corrective thinking. But then as she mourns the loss of her husband, she realizes that in fact she cannot escape self-pity and she must indulge it, because like she says, we are repeatedly left with no further focus than ourselves, a source from which self-pity naturally flows. So finally, I want to talk about the self that emerges out of all of her explorations. So one first must understand that in the absence of an other, the self must reconstruct it. Firstly, the self is scattered, and then it must reconstruct itself through memory, which itself is unreliable. So the reconstructed self, therefore, is unstable, it's disembodied, and it's dysfunctional. However, when Didion realizes that she is, and this happens in her forays back to memory, when she realizes that she doesn't know the man that she spent her entire life with. So when she understands that she is so alone, but at the same time, that memory is fully reliant upon John's interjection and upon other people's. And so there is that paradox of being completely alone and then also being completely dependent on others in order to create, perceive, and restructure herself, that she finds meaning. And so the words and language that she uses aid this realization, and life writing, which has a reflective process, allows her to excavate all these lost cells in time, so she can bring them back to the present and re-examine them and reconstruct a new person.
Shivangi, very politely, you just have 2 minutes left.
Yeah, I'm done. This is it. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Shivangi. It was a really good presentation. The themes and the pictures really spoke to us.
Thank
So now I would like to please to invite Sir to give his valuable response on the presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Shivankini. That was an awesome, fantastic presentation, and very theoretically informed, and especially like the way in which you talked about, the loss of self, in time, particularly, the character goes through right after the death of her husband. So, in a sense, memory constitutes the self, and it also destroys the self, right? And like it leads to our understanding of time, and also our the loss of self as time moves on, right? So one has to kind of fall back on memory and also destroy it in order for ourselves or oneself to be themselves and so on. So that I really liked, the way in which you have brought together all these points in your presentation. So I think I will end on that note. Have we overshot the time, or how are we? Ufuk?
So we just have a few minutes left. I would like to first take a question, and then we can come to a small note from you. So
Okay.
I think, yeah. So Shivangi, I think that you have a question from Barira Sumbul. How does John Didion's exploration of memory in the Year of Magical Thinking contribute to the construction of the self in the midst of grief?
Hi, Varira. Thank you for the question. And thank you, sir, for all your comments. So essentially, her memory plays a role. So there are two things that happen. Joan Didion tries to look back into her memory in order to look for signs of a death announcing itself, because she becomes a bit superstitious, because she remembers all these myths and folklores which say that death announces itself. So that's the one way in which the one reason for which she goes back to memory. And the second is that she no longer has the physical embodiment of John. The only John she has is the John of her memory. So she tries to reconstruct the person that she has now lost, in case there is something that she missed in his lifetime that she might be able to find in her memory. So like Sir was saying, that it's an attempt to reconstruct and put back the pieces of John together, or complete the puzzle that John was. But at the same time, when she realizes that the John in her memories also is not stable, that's what also dislocates her, disembodies her. So like Sir said, it plays that dual role where it is also offering relief, but then it's also completely destabilizing her. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay. Thank you so much. So
Shivangri, I was wondering if you have checked out C.S. Lewis's work on grief, because it's the other way around, the work that he wrote of following the passing of his wife.
I know of C.S. Lewis, but I haven't yet read him. Sorry.
Okay.
I'll read him,
so
sir. Thank you.
as we come, thank you so much, Shivangi.
Okay. All right.
So as we come to the end of the session, I would like to call our esteemed chair to present his views in the presentations. Just a small note, as we are very out of time.
I think I have already commented on all the presentations, so I'm really glad to see a lot of young students, researchers, making presentations on a very, pertinent set of questions concerning trauma, memory, and post-memory. So I really enjoyed the cut and thrust of arguments that were on offer in all these presentations that we have had, 5, in fact, to be precise. And I also like the fact that the presentations actually worked, dealt with a number of literary genres, including novels, songs, and memoir in Shivangi's case. So I hope that this conference will give our presenters more leeway and energy to carry their work forward. So, and I also take the opportunity to thank the Raleigh Literary Society for organizing this literary festival. And thank you all of everyone for being here.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, sir.
So, with this, I would like to end this session. It was indeed a blend of knowledge and new ideas. I wish that this conference serve as a catalyst for new discoveries, meaningful interactions, and lifelong experiences. I would like to extend gratitude to our esteemed chair, Dr. Munir Kuria, for his critique and comments. Thank you, sir, for your expertise and guidance to make this session a resounding success. Lastly, I would like to thank all the participants for sharing such thrilling papers and the audience for their wonderful observations and questions. Wishing you all an enjoyable and intellectually stimulating conference. Thank you and best regards.